welcome to biology, the scientific study of life. Glucose regulation as an example of homeostasis. When an animal takes in more calories than it needs to produce ATP, the excess can be used for biosynthesis. If the animal isn't growing in size or producing, the body tends to store the surplus in energy depot. In humans, the liver and muscle cells store energy in the form of glycogen, a polymer made up of many glucose units, as shown on this figure. If the body's glycogen depot are full and caloric intake still exceeds caloric expenditure, the excess is usually stored as fat. When fewer calories are taken in than are expended, perhaps because of sustained heavy exercise or lack of food, fuel is taken out of storage depot and oxidized. This may cause an animal to lose weight. The human body generally expends liver glycogen first and then draws the muscle glycogen and fat. Most healthy people, even if they are not obese, have enough stored fat to sustain them through several weeks of starvation. An average human's energy needs can be fueled by the oxidation of only 0.3 kilogram of fat per day. Caloric imbalance. Several problems occur if the energy budget remains out of balance for long periods. If the diet of a human or other animal is chronically deficient in calories, undernourishment results in this condition. The stores of glycogen and fat are used up. The body begins breaking down its own proteins for fuel. Muscles begin to decrease in size and the brain can become protein deficient. If energy intake remains less than energy expenditures, death will eventually result. Even if a seriously undernourished person survives, some of the damage may be reversible because a diet of a single staple, such as rice or corn maize, can often provide sufficient calories. Undernourishment is generally common only where drought, war, or some other crisis have severely disrupted the food supply. Another cause of undernourishment is anorexia nervosa, an eating disorder in which sufferers, who are most often female, compulsively starve themselves to lose weight. Detrimental effects also result from excessive food intake in the United States and other affluent nations. Overnourishment or obesity is an increasingly common problem. The human body hoards fat. It tends to store any excess fat molecules obtained from food instead of using them for fuel. In contrast, when a person eats an excess of carbohydrates, the body tends to increase its rate of carbohydrate oxidation. Thus, the amount of fat in the diet can have a more direct effect on weight gain than the amount of dietary carbohydrates. Obesity as a human health problem. The World Health Organization now recognizes obesity as a major global health problem. The increased availability of fattening foods in many countries combines with more sedentary lifestyles to put excess bounds on bodies. In the United States, the percentage of obese, very overweight people has doubled to 30% in the past 2 decades, and another 35% are overweight. Weight problems often begin at a young age. 15% of children and adolescents in the United States are overweight. Obesity contributes to a number of health problems, including the most common type of diabetes, cancer of the colon and breasts, and cardiovascular disease that can lead to heart attacks and strokes. The overall estimate is that obesity is about 300,000 deaths per year in the United States alone. The obesity epidemic has stimulated an increase in research on the causes and possible treatments for weight control problems. Researchers have already discovered several of the mechanisms that help regulate body weight over the long term. These homeostatic mechanisms are feedback circuits that control the body's storage and metabolism of fat. And several of the chemical signals called hormones regulate both long-term and short-term appetite by affecting satiety central in the brain. Inheritance is a major factor in obesity. Most of the weight-regulating hormones are polypeptide proteins, and researchers have identified dozens of the genes that code for these hormones. This hereditary connection helps explain why certain people have a struggle too hard to control their weight, while others are seemingly able to eat and eat without gaining a pound. As researchers continue to study the genes and signaling pathways that regulate weight, there is reason to be somewhat optimistic that obese people who have inherited defects in with a new generation of drugs, but so far the diversity of difficult to develop treatments that are widely useful and free from serious side effects. The complexity of weight control in humans is evident from studies of the hormone leptin. Leptin, one of the key long-term appetite regulators in mammals, leptin is produced by adipose. Notice, this is the hormone leptin. Fat cells as adipose tissue increases leptin levels in the blood rise, which normally cues the brain to suppress appetite. This is one of the feedback mechanisms that keeps most people from becoming obese in spite of access to an abundance of food. Conversely, loss of body fat decreases leptin levels, signaling the brain to increase appetite. Mice that inherit a defect in the gene for leptin become very obese. Researchers found that they could treat these obese mice by injecting leptin. The discovery of the leptin deficiency mutation in mice made front page news and initially generated much excitement among obesity researchers, as humans also have a leptin gene, and indeed obese children who have inherited a mutant form of the leptin gene do lose weight after leptin treatments. However, relatively few obese people have such defects in leptin production. In fact, most obese humans have an abnormally high level of leptin, which after all is produced by adipose tissue. For some reason, the brain's satiety center does not respond to the high leptin levels in many obese people. One hypothesis is that in humans, perhaps in contrast to many other mammals, the leptin system's primary function may not be preventing weight gain. Rather, the main function of the leptin system may be to stimulate appetite and prevent weight loss when the hormone level declines due to a loss of body fat. This physiological nuance may be a consequence of our evolutionary history. Obesity and evolution. Most of us crave foods that are fatty, such as fries, burger, cheese, and rice and ice cream. Though fat hoarding can be a health liability today, it may actually have been advantageous in our evolutionary past. It has only been for the past few centuries that large numbers of people have had access to reliable supply of high calorie food. Our ancestors on the African savanna were gatherer hunters who probably survived mainly on seeds and other plant products, a diet only occasionally supplemented by hunting game or scavenging